Geological endowment has never been the issue in the Yukon.
If you're not developing long-term positive relationships with communities, you will cease to exist.
If some of these projects were in BC or Ontario, they'd be mines by now. I think money is coming to the Yukon.
Welcome back to the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference.
The Yukon government has made it clear mining is central to economic growth, northern sovereignty, and capital attraction, with an explicit mandate to modernize mineral legislation, cut red tape, and deliver certainty. So in this panel, in the next few minutes, we're going to stress test this with a vision through capital markets operators and investors. And I'm happy to say we have an investor, an analyst, and a CEO. So the stress test case can't be any better than what we're going to have right here. I'm happy to welcome Nikki Adshead-Bell, Chris Beer, and Sandeep Singh. And so with tight time, we're just going to cut right into it. My very first question, in one sentence, what makes the Yukon investable right now or not?
Geological endowment, world-class assets across multiple commodities. We've seen lots of exploration success, and it's a location that actively encourages investment and spends a lot of commitment from government. And with the YMA, it's one of the few jurisdictions that I've seen that are very outwardly promulgating, trying to attract inward investment, and it's got the geological endowment to do that. And then the question becomes, how do you then take that next step? Because probably the biggest challenge that the Yukon faces is one of infrastructure.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, as the Minister just highlighted, with $400 million invested last year, geological endowment has never been the issue in the Yukon. But more so, I might be biased, but over the last several years, I've kind of noticed more alignment with stakeholders, especially government, all governments, whether it's federal, territorial, and especially now First Nations. We're starting to see an alignment, and there's patient capital that's already positioned in the territory, and I think with there's infrastructure challenges for sure, but they are solvable. So I think quietly we will continue to see more private investment.
Being last to answer questions here is not going to go well, I don't think. But just to reinforce what Nikki and Chris said, because I agree with them, look, it's mineral endowment first. If the assets, the projects aren't there of merit, it doesn't really matter what you do around that. Chris mentioned improving infrastructure. That's been a limiting factor for the Yukon. If some of these projects were in BC or Ontario, they'd be mines by now. But that infrastructure is improving, and I would say the one area where the government's done a great job is to continue to promote that infrastructure advancement is to the benefit of all Yukoners. And Yukon has a history of mining helping to drag infrastructure up to meet that territory. And then the last thing I would say, and I think maybe touched on as well, is just it's not, isolated to the Yukon, but it certainly applies. I think it's the changing or changed attitude towards mining and the importance of mining in the country and globally. I think all those things together make it a very investable place.
Sandeep, follow-up question on that. Do you feel the sentiment has been an abrupt change or a gradual change over a number of years?
Pretty abrupt. I mean, I would say for most of my career, it was tough to find a federal politician who would say anything positive about mining, and now it's the exact reverse. So I think there's an understanding that it's a core part of Canada if we're going to meet the challenges, provide what a future-facing society needs. That mining is a crucial part of that, and I think it's been impressive to see. I would say when you look at all the surveys out there of sentiment towards mining, it's never been this broad-based and as well understood.
All right. Well, let's harness this opportunity while it lasts. Absolutely. So, Nikki and Chris, obviously the rocks matter, the geology matters. You did a great job of expressing that. But before you even look at greater scale of projects, what are the two jurisdictional filters that decide whether capital ever reaches a project in Yukon?
Transparency around permitting. Every country, every jurisdiction has different permitting timelines, different regimes. That doesn't matter, but you need to be able to very, very clearly say what are the steps to successful permitting, and there not be an opaqueness around that. And so that's the big testament. How quickly can you permit a project that should be put into a mine? Some jurisdictions in Africa, for instance, you can go from discovery to production in under 4 years. That's unheard of. The average now is 20 years. And nobody is investing on a 20-year time horizon unless they're a pension fund. And so how do you, as a government, streamline the permitting process and make it very, very clear to the providers of capital, to the investors and to the corporates to then attract that capital and hopefully advance economic development?
Thanks, Nikki. I'd just further add, perhaps, capital doesn't require perfection. It just kind of requires predictability. And so along with what Nikki was saying on permitting predictability, just having that process that people can see and see the outcome clearly. Now, clarity without a clock can be a bit problematic in the investment resource cycle. And so maybe a clock is too harsh, but having a timeline back and forth with various stakeholders is important. But I used to invest a lot in Africa. I'm not picking on Africa. Obviously, the geology is fantastic, and we saw a big acquisition today. But I also look at political stability and durability. So, and we're seeing it more so. I think Sandeep hit on it. Like, if you invest all this money and the rules change, that's a very poor outcome for investors, stakeholders, and so that that positive durability and withholding the assets is a strong feature of the territories and certainly Canada.
Well, I want to follow up on the conversation on permitting, because we talk about permitting certainty a lot. I mean, we've been talking about this for years, right? But in practical terms, what does that actually mean for Yukon? And you mentioned timelines. Is it something maybe like replicating something in the US that we have, such as the Fast 41 that's been implemented? Like, is that replicable in the Yukon? More political durability? Like, is there analogs to what could be implemented in Yukon that maybe other jurisdictions are doing that you'd like to see that would attract more capital?
I think permitting certainty, like there's no such thing. I think it's certainty of process that you're after, and predictability of process, as was mentioned. Again, there are places, as pointed out, where you can go faster. But I've chosen not to be there. Many of us have chosen not to be there. There's risks and rewards. You can go faster, maybe get through your permitting process, but there's no assurance you get to keep your mine once you've invested the capital to build it, right? Or that the rules don't change. So I think we have an advantage in terms of the stability that Canada and the Yukon affords. Yes, we have to go through a bit of a longer process. And honestly, in the Yukon, it's probably the right thing to do. I mean, the Yukon has had challenges historically. It would be, I think, the wrong decision to try to push past those too quickly. I think we have to bring everyone along with us as we promote these projects. But I think when we push forward, our casino project, Chris is involved with Forte on coffee. There are good projects moving up the chain that are bringing people along with them, in particular the First Nation governments that we affect. So I think that's probably the right thing to do. Could it be a little bit more streamlined? Sure. I think you should kind of strive for efficiency in every facet. But I think there are steps and the right steps that need to be taken to help change a little bit of the history of the Yukon from a mining perspective.
Well, Sandeep, I got to put you on the spot here because you are knee deep into the permitting process for the casino project. So just from your experience, what signals for this process, what signals from government can reduce risk, and maybe where do you see capital hesitation right now in this market?
Well, look, it's hard to say that there's capital hesitation when the minister mentioned that $400 million was raised for the Yukon last year. So I think money is coming to the Yukon. So people are kind of voting with their checkbooks, so to speak, that this is a highly investable jurisdiction. Now, what we need to see is not just successes at the exploration stage, but successes in the development space, and then ultimately leading to mines. I think Nikki said that at the onset. Signals, tough to say. I think we've got projects going through kind of the sausage grinder, if you will, for lack of a better analogy, and we need to see them kind of start to come out. I think that would be very, very optimistic and positive for the Yukon. The last thing I would say, and I kind of meant to say it earlier, is it's nice to see First Nation governments taking an active role and being part of their own future from a mining perspective. I think that, more than anything, adds the greatest level of clarity and, I guess just that, the greatest level of clarity for investors when you see alignment. We're striving for that now. We're in that process. And if you can achieve it, that, more than anything, is the biggest de-risking, I think, that's in front of our projects.
Well, let's continue that discussion on Indigenous partnerships and capital insurances. But there was some significant news with projects within the First Nations in the last couple of weeks. Chris, how do Indigenous agreements and community relationships factor into capital decisions today compared to 5 years ago?
Yeah, I give that question quite a bit of thought because as an investor for 25 years, particularly the last 10, I thought, and a specialist in the resource space, whether it's oil, gas, or precious metals. So, yeah, I would say 10 years ago and during COVID, ESG, we had ES and G, so we had probably 10 questions we would have tried to address for each company, and we thought we were kind of experts in doing our job. But I think in the last 5 or 6 years, especially on the resource specialist side, I think recognizing not only that First Nations have obviously rights, but that they're governments in and of themselves, and that they're economic partners. I think that's recognized by the vast majority of specialists. But I also worked with a group, a huge group with the Royal Bank on as generalist investors, and I don't think they have that understanding fully, or at least not yet.
Do you think those relationships are any differently dynamic in the northern territories than they are anywhere else, like in the provinces or even the U.S.?
Well, everywhere is unique. I mean, Nevada has a process, like a 5-year process. So the Sandeep's perspective, going in is 4 or 5 years, but coming out that you can get the permits. So I don't think it does. You almost have to be an expert right now across Canada with First Nations involvement, and so that presents some challenges. But at least I would say over the last 5 or 6 years, people know that going in and are trying to work through it.
Nikki, do you think risk premium has decreased a little bit in the Yukon because of ongoing, continued productive relationships with industry and the First Nations?
I think risk premium dissipates in a bull market. I would say nobody cares about risk in these kind of markets. That flies out the window. But I think that the Yukon government, almost uniquely in Canada, is very, very active. They have a big presence at the conferences with the YMA. So they're doing all the right things and saying that we will be a long-term partner. And I think that Sandeep hit on something really important at the start, which is this reframing of mining as not being the bad thing that everybody thinks it is. So 10 years ago, if you're a politician and you're negative on mining, you're not going to lose votes because everybody hates mining. So the one thing that's changed with the advent of critical minerals and so on is that people now actually start to understand where their stuff comes from. And so you're seeing, I think, a grassroots sea change, and not really because we've done a really good job as an industry of messaging it well, but we're starting to see a reframing of the narrative, and you're just seeing a change in tone. And I think what that also means, it makes it easier for politicians who are relying on votes to be more openly supportive and perhaps put some systems in place that smooth that process. So, and just to touch on the First Nations, at the end of the day, you can't move your rigid factory as a mining company. And so any company, whether it's an exploration, from the time that the first geologist hits the boots on the ground, if you're not developing long-term positive relationships with communities, whether that's First Nations, whether that's local communities or service providers, you will cease to exist. Because if locals don't want you, There's no way that regulators, even if you do everything else right, if you have very, very bad relationships, it's very hard to get past that. And so one thing that I look at, and I think that most companies will do when they go into a new jurisdiction, and whether that's in Canada or elsewhere in the world, is how do you best build long-term relationships so that they see the economic benefits to local communities and are supportive of you driving forward. And I think that's a really key de-risking element.
All right, we've got 30 seconds. I got one last question, and a couple hundred people are here, have spent their morning with us, so let's give them something to kind of walk away with. If investors walk away from this room remembering one thing, what must happen in the next 24 months to materially increase capital flowing into the Yukon? One sentence.
Commodity prices keep rising.
I think permitting clarity. I think the Yukon suffered from like a confidence crisis on the development side, so I agree with Sandeep. Over the next 2 years, if we start to see progress, like tangible pathway forward for development, I think the patient capital will become very, very large.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning, early morning, great market, and we'll be back. Thank you so much.